You're listening to the Assembly Call IU podcast and postgame show, the place where Indiana fans across the globe hang out online after every IU basketball game. Join us for our live broadcasts on Thursday nights and immediately following every IU game at our website, assemblycall.com. That's assemblycall.com. This week's edition of Assembly Call Radio is coming right up. Before we get to that, a quick word about tickets and about our sponsor, SeatGeek. Getting tickets online can be far too complicated, something that you've probably experienced. With hundreds of sites and varying levels of reliability, it's hard to know who to trust, and that is why SeatGeek is the way to go. SeatGeek pulls millions of tickets into one place so you can easily find the seats you want for a price you're willing to pay. There is nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. So whether you want to support the football Hoosiers for one of their remaining home dates, or you want to plan ahead and get tickets to basketball games for this season, SeatGeek is the way to go. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone personally. It is by far the easiest way that I've found to shop for tickets, and that's what I use when I want sports tickets, when I want concert tickets. And the reason why I use SeatGeek is, again, kind of what I mentioned about how they just make the experience easier than it is anywhere else. SeatGeek will search multiple ticket sites. They grade every ticket based on a value, which is really nice. And that helps you really quickly identify the best seats that fit your budget. And every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence, which is really nice because sometimes you're on those other ticket sites, you don't feel quite as confident. And best of all, Assembly Call listeners get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. So all you do is download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY today. That's promo code ASSEMBLY for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. SeatGeek, life's an event. We have the tickets. And now, here's this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. This is our 99th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 432nd episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, October 25th, 2018. I am your host, Jerod Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion. Martin takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment occurred on Tuesday night when IU tweeted out a picture showing a new Hoosier wearing the gold practice jersey, Romeo Langford. A couple weeks ago, I reserved this space to laud Juwan Morgan for being the first Hoosier to wear the gold practice jersey this season after what his coach described as, quote, dominating play in practice. It's exactly what you want, your senior leader setting the tone to start the season. So why is it a big deal that Indiana's talented freshman, who we all expected to win the gold jersey at some point, was the first one who took it away from Juwan? Well, because it's exactly what Romeo said he was going to do. As Juwan informed us all at Big Ten Media Day, Romeo was not happy about falling behind Juwan in the gold jersey standings the first time around and vowed to take it from him in the future. Since it's fairly safe to assume that the senior captain Morgan didn't just start coasting in practice, it's also fair to assume that Romeo had to elevate his play to rise up and earn the jersey. And that, to me, says a lot about Romeo's competitiveness and maturity even at this early stage in his freshman season. And when you combine that with his athletic gifts and basketball talent, you have the recipe for a freshman who appears ready to be a star from day one. You also have the makings of a year-long battle for that gold jersey that will compel Indiana's two best players to bring their A games every day in practice. That will only serve to make each better and raise the ceiling for how high one of college basketball's best duos can carry this deep, talented group of Hoosiers. Okay, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, he is the Jeff Brom of Girls Youth Sports Coaching in Cincinnati, the president emeritus of the Robert Johnson Fan Club, and one of the nation's most accomplished bracketologists.
Andy Bottoms, the nation's most accomplished bracketologist.
He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, what is your Bottoms line from the last week in IU basketball?
Well, I would say a couple things. I mean, one, it's Romeo's birthday. So, I mean, what better gift could he get than to be we wearing the gold jersey and be the recipient of the banner moment? So that obviously a huge honor.
A dream come true for him, I'm sure.
His birthday, yes. Among his many accomplishments, I'm sure this will rank among them. So that's exciting. I was surprised to hear episode 99 of the show. So on episode 100, we'll essentially serve as the post-game show for the exhibition game next week in the season that we have anticipated as much as just about any other, I think, that we've done the show. So that'll be a cool milestone to hit for the radio version of the show. And quite honestly, I was going to go the same place you did with the with the banner moment, the shot of Romeo wearing the jersey shooting into the end where all the banners hung and IU putting that out was pretty cool. And I think, for all the excitement that there's been about him, for what he can do on the floor, I think a pretty amazing honor because, as Archie's talked about all the things that go into earning the gold jersey, it's, Romeo certainly comes in known for his scoring, but there's a lot more that goes into it to earn that gold jersey, at least based on everything that we on the outside know about the things that they look at that go into it. And like you said, I think that's a pretty amazing sign that he has put his mind to something that quickly and been able to accomplish it. And I'm sure this was one of many battles in the war that will go back and forth between those two over the course of the season. But certainly a cool thing for him, and I think a great sign for the program. And again, we find ourselves trying to read a whole lot into something that is not actual, on the court game basketball. But this is the last time we'll need to do that. We'll actually have games to talk about in a week.
That's right. And Andy, we will not have our usual co-host with us tonight as Ryan is taking the evening off. Whatever will we do in his absence?
Almost impossible to replace no matter who you get.
Is that so? Well, we asked our usual fill-in co-host, Coach Tonsoni, to join us, but he has bravely made the trek north to Minneapolis to watch the football Hoosiers try to salvage their season against the Gophers this weekend.
Bring it on.
Godspeed, Coach. So with Ryan and Coach both out, we decided to throw caution to the wind and reach for the stars. This is an IU basketball podcast by the fans and for the fans, after all, so who better to fill in with the season right around the corner than one of the most loyal and enthusiastic supporters of IU athletics out there?
Dan Dockich.
No, definitely not. Our special guest tonight is the man behind the most followed and beloved IU fan Twitter account. He's a co-host for the Indy Stars podcast, Mind Your Banners, and he puts on one hell of a Hoosier hysteria tailgate, to which I can now personally attest. He is Chronic Hoosier.
Can a brother get some coupons?
Chronic, welcome back to the Assembly Call. How excited are you for actual basketball to be played in Simon Scott Assembly Hall a week from tonight?
I don't even think I've got the words to express it. I'm always really excited this time of year. It's just great to know that you're going to be in the hall, in single digit days. But when you take the particulars about this team, especially Juwan senior year, Romeo's arrival on campus, and as we were talking about before the show, there's a whole boatload of guys who I'm really excited to watch kind of grow and develop, as well as continue their Hoosier careers. I cannot wait. I absolutely cannot wait for it to start. And I'm thrilled to be here for the 99th show.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to have you. We always enjoy your appearances. So here's what we're going to talk about this week. Real games are coming, as we said. That means it's time to make some hard choices regarding the rotation. We'll give you some of our thoughts on that. Last year, Indiana's strength was clearly its defense. What about this year? Will the offense or defense lead the way? We'll discuss, and then we will discuss the latest on the college basketball fraud trial, what the verdict means, and our thoughts on seeing Indiana's name pop up in that sidebar conversation, and then we will answer your questions. All of that coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. Real quick, before we get to this week's top story, I want to remind you about the best way to shop online for great deals on IU basketball and football tickets. Just remember this URL, iutickets.shop. It will take you right to SeatGeek, where you can immediately find the best deals on IU basketball tickets, other sports tickets, concert tickets, and more.
Can a brother get some coupons?
Yes, Chronic, thank you for asking. As a matter of fact, you can get a coupon. Just use the promo code ASSEMBLY to get $20 off your first purchase. And when you use that URL, iutickets.shop, we actually get paid a commission for referring you. So it's a great way to support the show.
That's the coolest thing ever.
We agree. So again, when you need to buy tickets, the best and easiest way to do so is with the URL iutickets.shop. And remember the promo coupon assembly for $20 off your first purchase. Again, iutickets.shop.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, Chronic. See, I didn't warn you, Chronic. That's one thing that's changed since your last appearance, is we now mine your old appearances for drops that we can play at opportune times when they fit the content.
We're still preseason at this point. We're not even in the exhibition season yet, and your soundbite game is already at championship level. I'm floored. I'm over here dying.
Okay, so let's, Andy, before we get to that, I want to give a shout out, actually, to one of our longtime listeners, Adam Lehman. He sent me a message earlier today, said he and his wife just had their first baby on Tuesday, already wearing Hoosier onesies. So congratulations, Adam. We, all of us here, can relate with the excitement that you must be feeling. So we wish you guys the absolute best. Very, very happy for you. Andy, you sent an email earlier today when we were kind of going back and forth about topics that I thought was pretty interesting. You said, if we assume the early rotation contains Morgan, Romeo, McRoberts, Justin Smith, Devontae Green, Evan Fitzner, Race Thompson, and Robert Finnessy, that's 8. Maybe we can each pick a guy outside of those 8 and convince the others how they cracked the rotation. And my first thought when I read your list is, where's Al and Jerome? Because they both seem like guys that are going to be in there. And right there, you're already at 10. And that's with a lot of other guys.
My initial draft of the email had them in there as well. And then I was like, well, that doesn't really make sense. I think, I don't remember if it was Podcast on the Brink that you guys had a question similar to this, where I think there was like 9, or you guys said 9. And I couldn't remember who the 9th was that you had. So I assume it was one of those guys, or did you have both of them in there?
I mean, it's hard to not have both of them, but I think certainly you have to expect Al to be there because he has the experience and just because he's, one of the 4 ball handlers that's on the roster. So he's a guy that I would expect to be in the rotation early. And Jerome is so talented, you would expect him to grow into it as the season goes. But, it is, you see that question and it really kind of puts into perspective just how deep this roster is. So let's get your thoughts on it. Let's get Chronic's thoughts on it. I mean, you take those 8, and I guess to me, I would add Al there because I think he's clearly going to be in the rotation. But
I think that's fair. I had both of them, and then I was like, well, I can't put 10, so I figured we could just debate who we thought, if there was a 9th, who we thought it would be.
All right, so then maybe let's kick it to Chronic first. Chronic, do you agree with that, with those 9? And then who do you think the next guy would be?
This has been something I've struggled with since, honestly, in earnest, since Fitzner's announcement that he was coming. It's going to be really, really tough to figure out who's going to get left behind in the rotation this year, at least at this point. That may well clarify a couple weeks into the season. That's the thing about this roster, though, is I think it's got the dynamics that it can give Archie so many different looks. I wouldn't be surprised, and I was thinking about this today because I knew you guys always bring great discussion and kind of anticipating where we may go with this. I could very well see Archie really putting the gas on when it comes to the defense and guys who aren't just absolutely flying everywhere, guys who he's just going to have so much flexibility in how he chooses to line them up. And I was thinking as we were likely coming to this topic, I honestly don't know. Perhaps Jake Forrester. There's always the issue with Duran's injury. Like that could self-resolve. It could be something that lingers for a while. It could be something where perhaps he's a go early on, but just not quite back yet. And Archie takes more time to ease him in. But then you also wonder when the situation with Duran arose last year, I don't think anybody really saw Justin Smith making the leap that he did over the course of the season. And with the amount of talent that's on this roster and the depth of it, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised as well if one of those guys who you think maybe going to be in the back end of the rotation line ends up progressing at a rate that nobody saw coming and brings something to the lineup that Archie just can't keep on the bench any longer. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I tell you, it makes the opportunities that guys get early in the season in games like against Chicago State and Montana State so important, because for some of those guys that are toward the end of the bench, they've really got to show. I mean, obviously it's going to be based on practice, but, in games, they're going to have to show that they're ready for the bright lights to kind of stick in there as the rotation starts to shorten. But, I mean, Andy, what do you think as you look at it? I mean, Jerome seems like the next obvious guy, but you never quite know what to expect from a freshman, and yet he's probably one of the 3 or 4 most talented players on the roster.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one that kind of seems the most obvious, just because I think when you look from a talent perspective. But that being said, is it that clear that they really I don't want to say need another offensive option, but I think that's, kind of the interesting piece about that. I don't know if this is probably an answer that I would have felt least likely to say a little while ago, but it does feel like there's some good vibes around Clifton Moore. I think Juwan had a couple things to say about him at Big Ten Media Day. I feel like where, we kind of talk about Race Thompson as essentially like, his redshirt year, how important that is to him. I think what we may look back and see is that what happened with Clifton Moore is kind of the same thing. I thought he showed a few things in the scrimmage at Hoosier Hysteria, just from an activity level standpoint. So I'm a little bit intrigued by him to see if he could work his way into there. I think he or Forrester probably become, maybe an energy guy to give him 5 minutes off the bench and maybe 8 minutes on a given night. So he's a guy that I'm at least kind of intrigued by right now. Whether he can really make that kind of jump and do it, I don't know, but he's had a year in the system to both learn what Archie wants to do and, really put some weight on, which was an issue for him coming in. But from a skill standpoint, he's got an interesting skill set compared to some of the other guys that are in the mix there, it feels like.
Let's hit this really quickly, but I've gotten this question more than I anticipated, but it's basically people asking if Indiana should go to a platoon system, kind of like what Kentucky did. My response, I know, I just want to address it. My response to that is, I don't like that, number one, but also number two, it's not a roster stocked with 5 stars. Like, you can't just roll out your second 5 and treat that like it's a starting lineup. Indiana has depth, but they all have to work around Romeo and Juwan, and hopefully Justin kind of puts himself in that same category. So it's not where you're just going to, like, it's 2 5s of equal or almost equal talent level. So I just want to, Chronic, I'm assuming you agree with that. I just want to put that to bed because I've gotten that question more than I ever would have anticipated.
Honestly, and so much of it, one, I think it's just a terrible strategy as a whole. 2, there's a connotation of Calipari's whole branding strategy that, we're so great, we're just going to platoon out 2 5-man NBA rosters at a time. No, I think it's terrible. I think but I'm not saying that Archie doesn't have, I think you're right. It's not the talent level that you're going to be able to see that. I do think, however, you may see situations where there's going to be a lot of combinations at play. And maybe you'll see combos that he likes in unison or in combination together that, maybe that's, it's kind of like a hockey when they do line changes. Yeah. Sometimes there's key pieces to each line that you want to get out there no matter where the line rotation falls. Perhaps that's something you see where maybe he's platooning, whether it be the backcourt, whether it be, who knows? That would be about as close as I would imagine Archie would ever come to that type of substitution pattern, though.
I don't think I've ever seen the chat mob just absolutely trash a question as much as they just trash that question. Okay, no platoon. Point very well taken.
Yeah, I think that, I agree. I think the good thing about it is, the fact that the talent level is at a place where that is even a remotely rational discussion point is, if anybody had brought that up last year, you would have thought they were insane. So, it's good. So I will choose to look at it in a positive way, that is even a discussion that someone could reasonably ask, but I would agree. I just don't see that happening. I don't think you're going to see a time when one of Romeo or Juwan is not on the floor, barring a blowout.
Yep. Okay, coming up on the assembly call, last year Indiana was forced to hang its hat on defense because the offense just wasn't very good. With both figuring to be much better this year, will either stick out as a bigger strength for Indiana as we go through the season? We will discuss. Stick with us here on the assembly call. You are listening to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to participate in our unedited live broadcasts,
chat mobbers,
or watch those replays, then check out our YouTube channel. You will be privy to all of the Between Segment banner that doesn't make it into the radio show or podcast edit.
It gets all sorts of wacky.
It really does. Come get wacky with us on YouTube, youtube.com/assemblycall. I am Jerod Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and our special guest co-host, Chronic Hoosier. And guys, for this segment, let's talk kind of offense versus defense. Last year, Indiana was a team that, was certainly challenged offensively, quite inconsistent on that end. The defense didn't start out very good either, but as the season went along, that clearly became the strength of the team. And it's what we know Archie Miller wants to hang his hat on. But my question is, as we look at this season, with the prodigious offensive talents that Romeo Langford brings to the table and what we know Juwan can do, and now with Evan Fitzner to kind of improve the shooting and just more overall offensive talent than we had last year. And this question actually came to us from Scott inside of our community. He basically wanted to know, what do you expect to be more efficient, the offense or the defense? And according to the KenPom numbers, the offense is 27th in the preseason projections. The defense is 33rd. So, Chronic, I'll go to you first. What do you expect to kind of be, what drives this team or its biggest strength, or do you see a big enough difference between the two to, make it worthwhile to point out even?
I think I'm naturally inclined to lean towards the defensive side, simply because that's kind of Archie's MO. That's what he really has emphasized. He wants this team to be, as a defensive first team. I think offensively it holds the potential to be pretty special. I don't think you can overstate the addition of Romeo Langford and just what that could bring to the offense for this team. But also looking at guys like Evan Fitzner, the ability to stretch the floor out, to get that corner shooter back again, to bring Juwan some help down low, whether it be through Justin Smith's developed game. I think the addition of Race Thompson is going to be amazing on both ends of the floor for this team. I think he brings a lot of toughness. But I was pretty impressed with some of the offensive moves he was able to show on Hysteria. And then you bring in the freshmen. I mean, there's so many things at play here. I think offensively, the one thing that I'm really looking at the start of the season is just exactly how does the ball move around it? How do they distribute the scoring? What kind of chemistry can these guys achieve? And then, on a whole nother level along those lines, in what various combinations does that kind of morph and change a little bit? So I think the defense is probably going to be a little bit more known element going into the season, at least as we're prognosticating at the start of the season. But I think the offense could be pretty special as well. And more than anything, I think on both ends of the floor, with the depth that he has and the talent across that bench, I would greatly expect to see tempo increase, and I would greatly expect to see the intensity on the defensive end be heightened at least a couple of notches from where we've seen it before, just because he's going to have the ability to keep fresh legs out there.
Andy, what do you think?
Well, I look back at what Archie's done over the course of his career, and his first 3 years at Dayton, the offense was better than the defense by a pretty wide margin. Now, I don't know, those teams weren't, one of those is the one that got to the Elite Eight. But some of those, I don't know how much that was, kind of carryover personnel and things like that. But then the last 4 years, so his last 3 years at Dayton plus last year, the defense was better. So I guess I'll go with that trend. If you look at the numbers defensively last year, where IU struggled, at least was ranked the lowest, was on the preventing offensive rebounds. I think the additional size, athleticism this year helps that. Certainly don't need to remind everyone that the 3-point defense was not good. And while there's varying arguments about how much the defense can really impact that, I would like to think that would be better. So I think the defensive numbers have a chance to take a decent jump with those, and certainly we would expect the offensive numbers to jump as well. For some of the same reasons that the 3-point shooting almost has to be better. Turnovers in the second year, assuming somebody grabs hold of the point guard role, get a little bit better. But if you look at last year, the defense has a 27 spot head start. I think the gap certainly closes, but I would say the defense ends up carrying the day again for Archie, and I think some of that could be there's not quite the talent level in the Big Ten. So if IU plays defense, this year, I know there's adjustments in the KenPom numbers, but I do think from a talent perspective in the Big Ten, a lot of teams jumbled in the middle, not quite the high end kinds of groups that were there last year.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Andy. I just feel like I have a little bit more confidence in the defense, just seeing the growth last year. And look, we're all very excited about what Romeo can bring to the table offensively, but I think the offense has the potential to be really good. Like, I think this team has the potential to have a top 15 offense if the point guard play is good on a consistent basis, if the 3-point shooting improves. But I guess, Chronic, that's kind of where my question marks come with the offense is, how is the point guard play going to be? We all expect Evan Fitzner to be a 40+% 3-point shooter, but do we see the improvement from some of the other guys, that lifts that 3-point shooting up enough to give us, to give you the kind of efficiency that can start getting you into the, to the top 20, the top 15? Because I think it'll be better, but I don't know quite how much it'll jump up with the personnel Indiana has this year.
I would also like to add, as much as I'm looking for an improvement in 3-point percentage, probably the most obvious room for improvement on this team that could have a significant impact on the offensive numbers is their free throw percentage.
Yeah.
If these guys can just convert 7% more of their shots than what they hit last year at, I believe, what was that, 65, almost 66%. I mean, you start sniffing the 70s, even the low 70s, and you're adding a whole lot more points into the offense.
Yeah, and there's every reason to believe that will be the case. With the free throw shooting, you had Freddie McSwain taking 70 free throws last year. Deron Davis took a bunch. Who knows how many he'll shoot this year, but he should be better because he was a much better free throw shooter as a freshman. Andy, we have about 30 seconds left this segment. I mean, defensively, you feel confident with the defense. What's your biggest question mark about the defense entering the season?
I think it's still being able to, contain dribble penetration. I think what you and Ben Ladner talked about on the Monday show with some of the pick and roll coverages will be interesting to see how they do that, because that was really a problem, and that's such a big part of defense these days is trying to defend ball screens effectively.
Do you expect Indiana to kind of change up how they're doing that some?
I doubt it. You might see a few wrinkles here and there, but I think, a lot of times coaches at this point have a pretty good stance on how they want to handle those situations.
Yeah. All right. Well, and look, I think the one thing that we can all agree on is both the offense and defense should be better. And the ideal is for this team to be balanced on both ends of the floor. And hopefully that is what we see. All right, coming up, those of you listening on the radio Friday night, you may be switching over to high school football, so be sure to catch the replay on assemblycall.com. For everyone else, we're going to discuss the college hoops fraud trial and Indiana's name popping up in it next, so stick with us here on the Assembly Call. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and our special guest co-host, Chronic Hoosier. Remember that if you are a serious IU Hoops fan, then you need to be subscribed to our free IU basketball email newsletter.
There's a high-level operation going on out there.
You will get our Six-Banner Sunday news roundups, as well as our detailed post-game analysis emails once the season begins. This content is why more than 6,000 of your fellow IU fans are already subscribed to our list, and joining them is easy. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com.
Make no excuses.
Can we get some basketball, please?
Okay, back to talking basketball. Well, kind of talking basketball, because we've got this corruption trial that has been going on that's gotten a lot of attention. The verdict is in, and so we want to talk about this on kind of two fronts. We want to talk about the actual trial, the verdict, kind of what it means, the bigger picture, and then also talk about Indiana's very, very small involvement in it, but kind of what that means and what we think about that. So let's start, Andy, by, the trial is in, and you and I both listened to Rob Doster's podcast, and I think for anybody who might be having trouble figuring out how these three guys, Jim Gatto, Merle Code, and Christian Dawkins, how they were actually found guilty of something that, seems like it's just normal everyday business in college basketball and that is an NCAA violation, I would recommend this podcast, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Essentially, it boils down to you have to view the school differently from the team, because it's really easy to look at it and say, wait a minute, how did Kansas, how are they defrauded out of this when they're trying to help them get players? But it's more from a school perspective, and it deals with like how scholarships are paid out, and it's a little bit complicated. I don't want to explain it all here, but I would recommend that podcast. But that really kind of illuminated for me how they came to the verdict that they came to, and it made it, Andy, I mean, you listened to that. Did it at least make a little bit more sense why the verdict came in how it did? Because when I first heard it, I was kind of flabbergasted.
Yeah, and I think Matt Norlander and Gary Parrish talked about this as well. Norlander was at a lot of the trial, and so the attorney that Rob had on, Jason Belser, not to be confused with the former Colts safety, was on and basically walked through the general premise is that the school is using state funding to hand out scholarships and grants and things like that, and they would not have done that had they known the athletes' amateur status was compromised by accepting this money. I think that's kind of how I boiled it down as I listened to both of those, and basically saying they were duped into believing that the athletes would be eligible and wouldn't have any kinds of problems. Now that implies that they wanted to know, and the coaches wanted to, weren't willfully a part of it. But that's the gist of it, is that, state funding and government funding essentially for those things was being routed to people who should not have been eligible for it. I guess that's kind of how I boiled it down. I don't know if you kind of walked away with a similar thing, but I guess that's to me what the gist of it was.
And then, now there are 2 more trials coming up. And I guess the big thing to look for now is, do those trials actually happen? Do guys, take plea deals? And it sounds like if those trials, like what college basketball coaches probably want to happen is for those trials not to happen, because then not so much stuff kind of gets into the public record. So that's kind of the next thing to watch in all of this. Chronic, as you watched all of this happen, as you saw the verdict and have seen the coverage of it, what did you think about it? And kind of what do you think this means in the bigger picture?
I think the trial as a whole, I mean, this whole thing where the FBI is now getting into the seedy underbelly of college basketball recruiting is, I'm trying to figure out what the end game is here, because obviously, organizationally, the NCAA hasn't shown any real interest in reforming what's really going on here. I mean, you have a commodity that has an extremely high value in the athletic talent due to the NCAA's definition of amateurism, and the fact that the schools make literally billions of dollars off of their backs and don't have to pay this talent. They very much are protecting of it. But at the end of the day, this trial does nothing. It's going to ruin some careers. It's going to open some people's eyes to what goes on literally at an unbelievable amount of schools across the country. And what I think what's funny, at least personally to me, is you look at some of the coaches reacting, and some of the quotes like, "They paid that guy how much?" Like, did they even see this guy? But that's what happens though when you have $1 billion industry and your labor is free. I mean, just because the NCAA says they're amateurs doesn't mean that the marketable value is now non-existent. You can't create a prohibition on something that has a value to it, an inherent value to it, especially something that's as high as a value as this is. On the micro level here, yeah, I think Douster was spot on, at least in his article. I haven't had a chance to catch the podcast today. It's kind of sad at the same token too, because they have no problem extracting swift justice on the kids involved in this and some of the peripheral players. But when you look at the coaches, when you look at the teams, and I don't care what how you have to parse this to understand how the schools were the ones that were defrauded, they're also the beneficiaries of this illicit activity. You could say they're co-conspirators in it, in as much as it's their very employees who have been directly implicated, and it has been proven in court. There's evidence showing that the schools know, or at least the teams, the coaches know exactly how this thing works. They continue to reap riches from it. So you look at DeSouza, he's immediately ineligible, or at least Kansas is withholding him because they know exactly how that's going to play out. And yet Kansas just gets truck along, start the season with a number 1 ranking, continue to put together, top ranked classes. And, Bill Self will be, perhaps hanging a banner before they even get to the point where the committee is going to consider investigating his involvement in it. And I think it's ridiculous the way in which this thing's playing out without ever addressing what's causing all of it. And what's causing it's because the NCAA doesn't want to play its athletes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that was kind of the hope that some people had, is that, from this trial and from everything that's happened, shine a light on what's going on, and that you would see some real change, and that some of that, would change for the better. And I don't know if we're going to see that. Do you think we will see a more emboldened NCAA now, that, because of the information that they can get from the FBI, and because, people are certainly going to be a little bit more scared now that people are going to jail for stuff like this? I mean, do we think that they'll start to go after some of the bigger schools, or is there just too much money at stake and, just not something that they're going to want to do?
I think when you look at the history of the NCAA, especially as of late, and the way in which they've handled some of these major scandals, it probably amounts to a little more than a slap on the wrist at the end of the day. I think they realized after the Reggie Bush episode, when I say they, I mean the schools. And when I say the schools, you also have to understand the schools are the NCAA. It's a member institution. That organization is only going to do what its members tell it to do, and what they decide is in everybody's best interest. And especially when you start talking about blue blood programs like Kansas, and maybe not blue blood, but certainly blue chip like Arizona, for example. I don't foresee them doing anything that gets in the way of the cash cow. or that stops the production of their golden goose right now. And from what we've seen on Condoleezza Rice's commission, the way in which they're trying to restructure the summer circuit and all of that, it's really lipstick on a pig. I mean, it does nothing to address the fact that when you have a prohibition on players extracting any value for the services or even their name, image, and likeness, that doesn't just make the demand for those things go away. Especially when you see, until NBA salaries stop escalating, until people stop paying ridiculous fees for, the entertainment of watching these kids play, I think you're only going to see it, not only continue, but you're going to probably see it morph into ways that make it harder to detect.
You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms and our special guest co-host, Chronic Hoosier. So, Andy, the other part of this that, IU fans have been looking at and people have asked me about is, Indiana's name popping up. And I think way back in, opening statements, they provided a list of names that could pop up. And I think Romeo Langford was on that list, but his name never actually popped up in the trial. But, the thing that happened recently, I think it came out on Monday. It was the 20th, but it seemed like IU fans didn't really catch wind of it until about 3 or 4 days later. In an article at the Kansas City Star, there was a quote, and this was from a sidebar, so it wasn't actually read to the gallery, wasn't read to the jury, but it was just a sidebar conversation where the defense attorney, Schachter, was reading a text from this guy, John Lasko. And he basically said, hey, I'm in Indiana, and Coach Ostrom asked me for an update. They're super willing to do what it takes to recruit Silvio De Sousa. Is that something of interest for us? So it wasn't actually a quote from Tom Ostrom. It was someone, saying that Tom Ostrom said something else. And this has kind of gotten people concerned. What does this mean? Super willing? Is Indiana just as dirty as everybody else? Like, it's, you can take that and your mind can run wild with it. You can also look at it the other way and be like, middlemen are middlemen, and a lot of times, in this, people who kind of know how this stuff works have talked about how guys will try and play people off of each other and say whatever. So what I'm trying to say here is you don't really know much from this. But as you kind of looked at this, what did you take from this? Like, what does this kind of make you feel as an IU fan? Do you have any strong opinions on it one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think this in and of itself didn't really make me feel much of anything, I guess. As you think about this, I think there's a lot of ways you could look at it and you could talk yourself into or out of saying this is symptomatic of nothing or it's symptomatic of a larger issue. And I think, but I think based on what was there, the fact that IU was never really linked to De Sousa in any tangible way that I recall, at least, seems to make it a little bit easier to brush off. Now, the flip side of that is it's a little bit like, the argument for, Ryan's boy, Coach K and Zion Williamson and all that stuff. You've got stuff in the trial that comes up that says, the dad or the stepfather has his hand out for money from Kansas and other places, but then all of a sudden he just goes to Duke, and then you're supposed to assume that there's nothing going on. By a similar token, you've got IU, who's a big name Adidas school, and they're out there doing a whole bunch of stuff for other people. It also feels like a little bit of a leap to say there's not been any contact. There hasn't been any of that stuff that somehow involved IU. I think that's probably naive to assume as well that any big time program didn't at least have discussions with these, middlemen as you described it. So, and you can kind of couch that however you want and say that really bothers me. I don't want my program to behave this way. Or, you know what? I don't care. Everybody else is doing it. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And we're just going to, go on down the road and do that. And I don't really know how I feel about that part of it, quite honestly. Because the reality is if the program was as clean as could be, which many people would kind of, it was one of the things that people bring up about Crean, there were no issues. And yeah, there are other things going on, but people weren't happy with the level of winning at that point. So it's a little bit hard to say, I want to run the cleanest program out there and do this and results be damned, I'm okay with it, when I'm not totally sure that that's true for a lot of people. And I think it's all of this to me has been hopefully how people who don't follow it terribly closely about, how the sausage gets made. And you've got to kind of make your peace with, how involved you want your program of choice to be involved in it. So I guess to me, this issue in and of itself, not a whole lot. I think in the larger conversation, I'm not shocked to see IU or any big time school get somehow named in it.
Chronic, what do you think?
Looking at the particular quote, that question from the trial, I think what stands out to me is on its face the very statement, or at least the very piece of evidence that they were discussing at the time, was hearsay. I mean, by definition, it's Lasco describing Ostrom's words to a third party. It's one of those things as well. And for those that aren't real super familiar with the way the law works, especially trial law, it's an evidentiary matter that's before the judge, not in the presence of the jury. That's trying to get something in. It wasn't admitted to the trial. I didn't see from the Kansas City Star article or anywhere else, I guess, on what grounds the judge denied it. He may not have said anything, just said it was simply denied. But when you look at the reasons in which it could have been, there's a reason that it wasn't, at least for purposes of how it was trying to be introduced to the trial, whether it was hearsay, whether it was lack of probative value, relevance, who knows. That being said, though, I was kind of alarmed to see, not that came out in the trial, because I think, like Andy said, I'm not surprised when any name comes out in a trial such as this. If there's a Power 5 school that at any point has recruited top 50 kids. What surprises me is just how broadly it got overblown, at least in the local media community. And not by all. I mean, obviously it became national news and people had to talk about it. All that being said, though, the thing that struck me most since I read that is I keep going back to March 7th, 2015. I don't know if if that date rings a bell with anyone. Final game of the regular season in 2015, Michigan State was coming in town. There was some scuttlebutt the night before on Friday that perhaps that would be Crean's last game, or that perhaps he had made the decision that he was going to go look for greener pastures. I'd even heard so much as that perhaps the team had even been told that, and I was getting a lot of multiple sources were confirming kind of the same gist. And then we wake up the next morning and we find out that, lo and behold, there's Thonmaker, Mature Maker, and Thomas Bryant sitting behind the Indiana bench.
That is how you're a champion.
Yeah, that's exactly how you're a champion, is you get the top talent there when you need them the most, in the position that you most desperately need. IU got Thomas Bryant eventually. Most folks know the story with the Maker family, but it's always kind of struck me as odd how all that came together. And that's one of those where you get a glimpse perhaps at how the sausage is made. I don't know. We had an Adidas contract coming up about that time too. So, with what we now know, or what's at least been proven in the trial, what's come to light, unlike Coach K, I don't think it's just a blip. I don't think this is an isolated incident with just a couple of bad actors that have, spoiled the whole cart for everybody else. But I think this is probably how you see a lot of kids getting placed in college, to be honest with you.
Well, I think, even this discussion shows there's enough there that I think enough is known now. You can draw whatever lines you want to draw and make a compelling case to say anybody could be implicated in this in some way. And you could also, there's enough ambiguity that you could say, well, you don't know this. You can't prove any of it. And that's all by design in the way that this stuff has gone down. So it just is, whatever viewpoint you have, if you want to believe that a coach is clean and has no idea, like people want to believe about Krzyzewski has no idea, all of a sudden all these guys, are there. They certainly have built a strong program, but there's, again, you got guys who everybody knows are asking, or who sounds like they're asking everybody else for money. And then all of a sudden they don't need that from you. And you act like you don't know that even any of this goes on. That's pretty hard to believe. But equally hard to believe that literally every single, Power 5 program is involved in it either. The truth is somewhere in the middle, and people are going to draw the conclusions they want to draw based on what they believe about different coaches and programs and assistants and shoe companies.
All right. Well, good conversation. This is obviously something that will continue. We're not going to solve anything here tonight, but just wanted to kind of get that out there, talk about it a little bit. And when there is more that comes out, we will be sure to talk about it here on the Assembly Call.
I felt like we had an amazing conversation on all levels.
Thank you, Archie. All right, coming up in our final segment, as we always do, we are going to answer more of your questions, including what is Chronic's favorite IU memory, and our prediction for what will cause the first overreaction of the season, which should be fun. That's next. Stick with us. You are listening to the Assembly Call. We are wrapping up another week of talking IU basketball. I am Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and our special guest co-host this week, Chronic Hoosier. If you ever have a question for the show, just send us a tweet at Assembly Call, or better yet, leave us a voicemail with your questions. The voicemail line is 317-762-6253. That's 317-ROB-MAKE. You can leave a voicemail anytime, and we can then play your voice asking your question here on the show. We did not have any of those submitted this week, so let's go to some of our written questions. And Chronic, we have one specifically for you from our good friend at IU Artifacts. What is Chronic's favorite IUBB memory?
Tijon accepted my friend request.
There you go. And I don't even need to talk anymore.
Moving on to the next question.
No, a close run up to that. I did shake Tijon's hand at an ATM here in town once. That's pretty big on the list as well. I still haven't washed. I saw that question earlier today. I tried to think of a great. There's just so many of them. Probably the deepest or the realest, but it's kind of cheap too. Every game I got to go to with my dad. I mean, it's one of those things that for the rest of my life, I will always remember the feeling. And that's what it really is. It's just that visceral feeling of driving over with them. The landmarks we passed, the places we'd go pre-game, post-game, walking into the hall with them. Win or lose, it was always one of the best days ever. Probably a tie between, as far as personal experience, individual games. The Watt shot was just, it was out of this world. The hall was like I've never seen it. And we literally broke the gym, cracked cinder block walls. But I also wonder if that's not a recency factor. Being in Bloomington for the Oklahoma game in 2002, I got to watch it with my brother and a bunch of my close friends, my college friends as well. And then to go to Kirkwood afterwards. And the first time that we saw it at the Watt shot, but it was a whole nother level to be on campus when, there's students in the fountain and Kirkwood is completely shut down for a couple of blocks in all directions. And just to see Bloomington at its most hysterical. It's one of those moments you'll carry with you for the rest of your life and remember like it was yesterday.
Andy, what's your favorite IU memory? I know we've talked about this before, but
boy, I don't know. I still remember, Smart hitting the shot in 87 and kind of jumping around with my, my parents, and that, I don't know. I guess I would say that, although, certainly some of those memories with the, the Chaney era teams would fall right up there. When they smoked UCLA to get to the Final Four that year, just for them to kind of get over that hump and get there. I remember that pretty well. I don't know. I don't know that I have one.
Mine
how can you pick one?
I know, but yeah, it's hard, but it's one of those things. Like Chronic said, it's that feeling. Like to me, it's when Calvert broke the scoring record against Northwestern, because that was just like right in my sweet spot, and it felt like it was just the culmination of his entire career. And like just for a specific moment, like hearing all of Assembly Hall just go silent when that shot went up, and then just erupting as the shot goes in. I'll never forget that specific moment. And actually being there, kind of helps it sink in. But obviously the 2002 run is kind of the best like kind of sequence of events. But single moment for me is Calvert breaking the Big Ten scoring record.
I will say definitively, if you had to isolate one game that was the pinnacle of my IU experience, just Indiana basketball as a whole, regional finals, Damon Bailey's junior year, Pat Graham's senior year, Seymour, B&L versus Floyd Central, Barney Scott Gymnasium in Seymour. It was as close to a moment like I was living in the movie Hoosiers as I probably ever experienced in my life. It took us 15, 20 minutes to turn off of our road because of the stream of traffic coming from Bedford just to get to the gym. Capacity crowd. It's just the greatest basketball game, greatest basketball experience ever. And even being at the Watt shot, it's still miles ahead of that.
That's awesome. Okay, let's go to Josiah's question. So once the games start, what will cause our first significant overreaction as fans this year? Andy, what do you think? First overreaction. I mean, hopefully no one overreacts anything against Chicago State, because that is not going to be any type of competition.
Yeah, that would be one. I feel like no one should react to that game at all. They're all these like 1 to 353 rankings. I think they are close to the bottom in every single one of them. So
let's remember that, since we will be hosting a post game show. No.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't mean that we won't overreact, but of the ones that I've captured, this is out of 353 teams. 347, 347, 347, and 344. So consistently poor. So I don't think it will come in that game. If I had to guess about an aspect of the game, I think people would overreact to like point guard play in general. I don't know whether it will be good or bad. I kind of hope that it's good. But I think you could see people overreacting if Devontae struggles and saying, all right, we need to turn to Finney, or if he plays really well, all of our problems are solved. Everything is fine. I could see that really being the driver a few games in of this was the big question mark. Now we either have the answer or it's time to panic a little bit.
Chronic, what do you think? What will cause the first overreaction?
Romeo not averaging 20 points a game for the first month of the season as the offense kind of figures out what its rhythm is. I could foresee a loss at Arkansas, perhaps by close to double digits, because of its placement in the schedule. That's I don't want to call it a trap game necessarily, but it's certainly one where the degree of difficulty is perhaps a little bit greater than what I think most people want to give it credit for. True road game, decent team that time of the season, just has potential to get a little squirrely on IU. Other than that, I don't know. I mean, that's what Hoosiers do better than almost anybody in the country, save maybe Wildcats, is overreact. So it's a Pandora's box that I can't wait to open. I'll be leading the charge.
Yeah, I actually think whatever happens in the Marquette game will cause an overreaction, because I think it's going to be such a charged atmosphere. It's the first big game. If we win it, because Marquette is, good, like a kind of consensus top 30 team, everybody's going to get real excited and, just the optimism will go up even more. But if we lose it and it's a home game, then I think people will overact to losing a game at Simon Scott Assembly Hall. So I think whatever happens that game, there's going to be some overreactions.
I think that's reasonable.
Let me also add the first time that Romeo goes down with a knock.
Oh, boy.
And he's slow to get up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the same thing with Juwan. I mean, I think we all still kind of shudder anytime Juwan hits the deck, just because of, those first 2 years with the injuries. So anyway, someone knock on some wood or something. Okay, so let's hit this one quick. We've got about a minute and a half left for this segment. So this is from Alex. He says, overall, what do you think will be the greatest asset to the team this year? Romeo or the improved depth? He said he could see it going both ways, which has the makings of a good debate. Andy, I'll go to you with this first. What do you think would be the greatest asset to the team this year?
I would say Romeo. I mean, based on what I brought up and the question we had earlier, I think the depth is certainly a huge factor, but just to have a game changer like that, think about what having a guy like him, even on last year's team, would have meant. If it means 3 or 4 more wins, you're probably in the NCAA tournament. So I think that to me is the big one, and take some of the pressure off of Juwan, where he doesn't have to carry as much, that you don't watch him go off the floor for 30 seconds and freak out that the game is going to get away from you.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think it's Romeo, just because one guy can make such a big difference in basketball, and the depth is great, but you still need kind of the superstar player to put you over the top. Chronic, what do you think?
I totally agree. I think all the points are spot on, pretty valid. I would also add that, whenever you've got a kid that's projecting lottery, that's an instant upcharge to your offense, to your team as a whole. But I think one of the greatest attributes to Romeo's addition to this roster is probably going to be the way in which he can create more space for other people to move in the offense and just open up a whole lot more, just a number of elements that weren't present.
Andy, we've got about 10 seconds left. Which stat do you think will see the most improvement this year, the 3-point percentage or the free throw percentage, and why?
I'd say free throw percentage. I think it'll be I certainly hope both improve, but I'll say free throw percentage.
Yeah. I think I agree with you. All righty. That is going to do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat
mobbers,
join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening, Next Thursday is the first post-game show of the season. Get excited. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
This was the most ridiculous ordeal of my life.
Thank you for being here and for listening to this episode of the Assembly Call. We appreciate it. And we really do rely on the support of audience members like you to keep our show going and to keep growing. And so we have set up a page on our website at assemblycall.com/support that lists 5 ways that you can support the Assembly Call. And we encourage you to choose whichever method is the easiest and most convenient for you. One of the methods is donating, and so many of you have donated, and we appreciate it so much. On that page, you can choose a monthly recurring donation or an annual recurring donation or just a one-time donation, whatever works for you. And if you don't want to donate, another way to support the show is you can use our affiliate URLs, iutickets.shop or iustore.shop when you're going to shop for tickets or gear, and we will get paid a small commission when you use those links. But however you support the show, we appreciate it. Thank you.